I'm glad that I had a chance to meet you there. You were finding people to talk to build your career. I was just there for the parties. Well, hello there. This is Cool Gray, and you are listening to Cool Gray in Studio A. Welcome back to the podcast. We are in episode 7, which is actually part 6 and the final part of our current series, Creativity Born of Trauma. If you happen to be joining me for the first time, you can go all the way back to episode 2, which was the first part of this series. We're wrapping it up today. Then we're going to take a little hiatus and be back after the new year in order to bring you the second series of this podcast, which is called Personal Paranormal Encounters. I know several of you have told me that you're looking forward to that series, and I've got some guests lined up with some fascinating stories that I really can't wait to bring you. I can tell you with great confidence that it's a very enjoyable series, and I hope you'll all come back and join me for that. Following that, going into 2023, we've got some other things planned for you on a wide variety of topics like mental health and the creative process. You know, I'm all about a couple of things because I can't possibly be all about one thing. And those things are the creative process in general and inspiring and encouraging creative expression in the rest of us and in myself. The topic of mental health has always been interesting to me. I'm interested in humans, the human condition and human behavior, mine and yours and everybody else's. My informal polls have told me that y'all want to hear more about that. So I've got some guests lined up there. What I am doing here is having the conversations that I want to have with people that I find fascinating. And I think you'll find these people interesting as well. Today's conversation is with a very dear friend of mine, and I want to get right to it. So I'm going to be right back after this very short break, and we will have a lovely conversation with a lovely lady. Hey, Cool Gray here. I want to talk to you for just a minute about Patreon. Patreon is a social media platform where you can support this podcast, my YouTube channel, and other artists who are doing what I'm doing, which is making stuff happen on our own dime, on our own time. This is a way that you can support those efforts. And if you're enjoying this podcast, I would encourage you to join me over there. Not just because it helps me, but there are perks, people. Let me tell you what those are. At the very first tier of support, just $5 a month, you will get 24-hour advance access to every single episode in its audio format. At the $10 level and above, you will get a full video version of every single episode. That is not available anywhere else. Why is that amazing? Well, you'll be able to learn such things as, what do my guests even look like, especially when they're talking? Did I apply my eyeliner evenly? Am I wearing the same outfit as I was last episode? Do I have broccoli in my teeth? These are the things that are burning in your souls. I know you want to know the answers, and that's where you can find out. If you're not feeling goofy, I can also tell you that you'll get exclusive access to bonus content, not available anywhere else, monthly minisodes and quarterly blooper reels. I am also offering fan access. You can make requests. You can say, hey, Cool Gray, make a minisode about this, or why don't you talk about that? And I will listen to you. I may not actually do it, but I will listen to you. I am doing everything that you see here, from the writing to the editing to the recording to the promotion to the graphics. It's all me by myself, and I'm just really trying to cover my costs. I would love to welcome you over there to become a part of this exclusive community that gets all the nifty stuff that the rest of you are missing out on. So come on over to patreon.com, find me as Cool Gray Studios. There's a link in the show notes that will take you there more directly, and I thank you for considering that. I'd like to introduce my guest today. Pat Lewis has been a career artist in the imagination realm of science fiction and fantasy illustration. Her work has appeared on the covers of books by authors like Isaac Asimov, Robert Heinlein, Ursula Le Guin, and Anne McCaffrey, to name just a few. Pat has also contributed her designs for trading cards such as Magic the Gathering, Wheel of Time, and Lord of the Rings. And her work has been featured in many magazines, including Amazing Stories. She's worked on projects for the Smithsonian Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Connecticut Science Centers. And Pat's also been a very dear friend of mine for over 35 years, something that means the world to me. Pat, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I'm very glad you're here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes, you and I have known each other for a very long time, but not been in touch for all of that time. So the conversation we're going to have today covers a period of your life when you and I were going off on our own little adventures and not really being in regular contact. And I'm going to be hearing a lot of your story for the first time. So I feel honored and privileged to share that with the world at the same moment that I'm discovering it. And I know it's a deeply personal story. So I'm going to thank you in advance for being willing to come and share that today.
Thank you.
You are so talented. I am just not going to be shy about saying I've admired your work from the day that we met. You and I used to travel in science fiction convention circles a lot, where very often your work would be displayed in the dealer rooms. And I got to know you that way. But we became friends and hung out with a lot of the same people and had a chance to get to know how beautiful you are as a person, as well as how beautiful your work is. Had a couple of your prints hanging in my home. You come from a family of artists, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
Yes, I do. I think my great grandfather was an artist and he did some sculpture in Boston. So it's carried down through. My older sister is a painter, and my other sister is also a painter. And my brother's creative in his own way. He's not a painter or a visual artist, but he is kind of an artist in construction and how he formulates golf courses and does that kind of thing. So we were always encouraged to be creative, to try out new things, to be inquisitive. And I think that that's what has really spurred us on into leading a creative life.
So, were you aware of a natural ability for illustration or any other form of art as a child? Or was it something that you just decided to pursue and went and got trained in?
Well, when I was a child, I liked to draw because it was a way that I could experience the world. I would always ask myself what made something what it was. My mother always told a story about when I was 2 or 3 years old. I had drawn a horse, and she said that the horse was anatomically correct. It may have been a little out of proportion, but it had the hoofs, it had how the legs bend back, all of the things that make a horse. And we were always brought to museums. And over the course of time, I thought maybe I could make a living at that. And I had gotten a job at a planetarium as their artist. And I ended up going to a science fiction convention and seeing that people were creating these paintings and they were on book covers. And I loved to think about what would go on other worlds. I had started reading science fiction, and I ended up just being sort of propelled into that career in that direction.
What was it like being a planetarium artist? What were you doing there?
Oh, it was so fun.
Yeah, I didn't know this about you.
Yes, actually, that's where the museum aspects come in, where I ended up doing artwork for a lot of planetariums, doing show production, whatever they needed. If they needed a slide for a panorama of Mars, I would paint that, or I would
Wow.
paint some spaceships, I would paint asteroids, basically whatever the show was about and what needed to be done for the shows.
Had you been to art school and had formal training by this point, or was this your natural ability and just always being encouraged to make art?
It was a natural ability, but I consider myself self-taught. I would see something and aspire to it, and so I always was studying how somebody was doing things, what was the theory behind it, what are the academics behind it, and because art is kind of a personal, sort of lonely journey, I spent my time self-study mostly.
Now, listening to you say this, my dear friend of so many years, I've spent a good deal of time looking at your work. And for my audience, there will be on the blog that will accompany this podcast episode on my website. You'll be able to see some examples of Pat's work, and I encourage you to go and take a look at that. Just check the show notes for a link to that. You put people or aliens. There's usually a living, breathing entity in most of the work that you do. People anatomy is difficult to get right, but you are amazing at it, and you do incredibly detailed work. And so when you tell me that you are self-taught, that's pretty mind-blowing to me. I guess you can learn a lot just by standing in front of some of the greater works and really being able to get up close. And I know I do that with paintings that I love. When I'm in a museum, I get as close as the guards will let me and just look at every detail. How did you get that shadow? How did you shape that hand? How did you get those folds in the fabric? Mm-hmm. It's fascinating to me, even though I mean, there's some of my work I would hardly put it in the same category as the kind of painting that you do, but still, artists do that. We want to look at everything on a molecular level, I think.
Sometimes that can be not a good thing in trying to figure out too much how things work and trying to incorporate that as you're going along, whereas just having a feeling with it and maybe some light and shadow and a different approach. I think
very different approaches, for different ends. And you don't only work in paint, you do some three-dimensional work, you work in polymer clay, and you've done some doll making and other kinds of things as well. So if those are in the shapes of people or people-ish things, I imagine working in 3 dimensions probably informs that whole process as well for you.
It does. It does. I guess I've never been afraid to try anything. Failure is not an option.
I don't believe there's any such thing as failure when it comes to art. I've been saying that forever. Why do you think that your field of interest gravitated toward science fiction and fantasy? That's mostly been the areas that you've worked in professionally.
Well, early on, I was an avid reader, and my mother and I, when we went on vacation, we would share a bag of books. They were all these Gothic romance novels, and boy, were they ever the same plot. Oh my word, there was nothing creative about them at all. And I happened to go into this store, and she gave me like, I don't know, $5 or something. And there was a bin of books with the covers ripped off, and it was like 5 for $1 or something. And I started reading the backs of these books, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really interesting. This is very different. And each book seemed very different. And I ended up with a full bag of books that was all science fiction and fantasy.
What age was this?
I think I was probably about 13, maybe, something like that. And I spent a lot of time reading those books. And then by the time I was probably 20 was when I got my job at the planetarium. I had been doing science fiction like paintings just out of my own imagination, because these books were also different from the books that I had read. And they were imagining things, and I thought, why can't I imagine different worlds and that kind of thing? And so that's what really brought me towards it. And when I attended my first science fiction convention, which actually happened to be a world science fiction convention, and I had sold a painting actually to somebody in Europe, I forget where. It was so very exciting. And I couldn't wait to do another convention, but I had no idea that it was a world convention, and it didn't come back. So,
where was that world convention?
It was in Boston. It was one in Boston.
It was right in your backyard.
I didn't know that they actually did have conventions until a couple of years later. I found it, and I was like, I'm not letting this slip through my fingers again. And I just approached everybody and anybody as to, how do I find out about these things? Where do they happen? And from there, I started just going around on the East Coast. I wasn't one to hop on a plane and go, to other parts of the country. I just was getting work, and I moved to New York thinking that I was going to get more work, but my clients were still all over the country. I spend a lot of time in museums in New York. I think I went to every single museum in New York many times.
I am a big fan of the Met. I used to go there regularly. It was like a second home to me. I
Nice.
knew where all the exhibit halls were, how to find my favorite paintings. And all through my New York years, that was a place, even if I didn't go inside, just to go and sit on those steps for a while, there was something grounding and very home-like for me. I think
Yes.
it's interesting that you said that when you discovered this genre in a bookstore, that all the covers had been ripped off, and you had no idea that you'd be painting those covers at some point in the future. But obviously, you were creating them in your head while you were reading these stories and making these paintings. So, where was the first opportunity to actually do a cover for a book? What was it?
I think the first cover that I did was Hatrack River by Orson Scott Card, and it was a hardcover slip jacket or slipcase, whatever you call that.
Dust jacket.
A dust jacket,
Yeah.
yes. I ended up meeting the art director from the Science Fiction Book Club, and so I started to get a lot of work from them, and then also I started to get a lot of work from the Eastern Press. Just going to conventions and getting to talk to people, and it started to branch out.
I'm glad that I had a chance to meet you there. You were finding people to talk to build your career. I was just there for the parties. But still, there's a little something for everyone at those conventions.
Oh, we had great conversations.
We did. Oh,
Yeah.
there were lots of opportunities just to sit and schmooze and talk about anything under the sun. And being surrounded by artists and writers and people who are just interested in imagining things. Really, when I say I was just there for the parties, it really wasn't just to carouse at a party. Many of the conversations that took place among that group of people, I still can remember to this day. Nobody was afraid, no matter how many beers they'd fished out of the bathtub in the suite wherever the party was being held, they were still willing to just sit there and really get into amazing idea exchange. And I remember at a lot of parties, there would be a stack of paper on a table, and someone would always start, they would write a sentence. It was a dark and stormy night. And throughout the course of the evening, people would just wander by and add a sentence or add a paragraph. And at any point during the party, you could just go by and read what had been written and decide what came next. That is what's up, girl. you know, I miss those days, honestly.
And I think that's why we always had such great conversations because you're very creative in your own right. I just wanted to mention when you had said being able to direct the story, one of the things that a project that I'm working on now, people are doing the same thing. And I think that maybe that's what society needs is more of people working together to create, bring us into our Star Trek future.
Yeah, reading has been replaced by binging media it's a very passive experience. You're not even moving your eyes back and forth across a page anymore, let alone thinking about where's the story going to go. We're sitting back. When I'm watching Netflix, I'm practically laying down and I'm allowing it to wash over me. And I'm just basically taking a very passive role and just waiting for the story to be delivered and not engaging with it on any kind of active level.
Mhm.
And it feels to me like maybe something's been lost.
I do think that it has. Yep. Yep.
Let's talk about the series that I'm doing that you've been nice enough to participate in. It's called Creativity Born of Trauma. And so I'm talking to various creatives who have been on personal journeys, and their art has either been a part of their processing or a part of their recovery. And I know that you've been through a very serious medical crisis and one that nearly cost you your life. This happened during a period when you and I were not in regular contact, so I did not know until very recently what you had been through. And I still really don't know your story. I'd like to invite you to share it now, whatever you're comfortable sharing with us.
I ended up with sepsis and which is a blood poisoning. They didn't know if I was going to survive. I woke up and I did not feel good at all, and something told me, I better go to the hospital. They brought me up the stairs and they brought a surgeon in to talk to me. And they had been talking to my husband. They said, we're going to have to like do some exploratory and find out what's going on. And so they gave me some happy juice, which was a good thing because when my husband came in to tell me, the doctor said that you could lose the use of your right arm, which I'm
Oh,
right-handed.
oh.
So he said, "But, we'll deal with this, don't, worry." And so, he wanted to smooth over any fear that I had, but, luckily they gave me the happy juice first. So that so that I was like, "Okay."
So this was an exploratory surgery.
Yes, to find out, what it was. It came back as strep A. So they did like they take out some of your lymph nodes under the arm. And I never thought that I was going to wake up like 2 weeks later to, my husband just like looking at me saying, "Oh my God, honey, we almost lost you." He was crying and I was like, "What?"
Did that
I
happen during surgery? What happened there?
Well, during the surgery, when they realized how bad it was, they put me on, this
Propofol?
propofol, and so it's kind of an induced coma is what they put me on because they had to intubate me, and they ended up putting a stent down to my heart to, if they had to, like, shock me back. And, then they put me on dialysis too.
So that was so you went in for a surgery for the lymph nodes and then did not come back out of that surgery. Is that correct?
I didn't come back out for, like, 2 weeks.
2 weeks. So you were basically in a medically induced coma that they brought you out of when you were out of danger, or how did they
Right,
decide when that was time?
when I was finally, stabilized and,
Mhm.
they didn't want to leave me in too long, otherwise I never would have come out of
Sure,
it.
yeah. Now, during that time, you did not know that you had been in a coma for 2 weeks,
I did
but you were having quite an extraordinary experience while your loved ones were worrying over you in a hospital bed. What would you like to share with us about that?
Well, all of my family came, and I was surprised because, I have family members that don't go anywhere no matter what, and, my husband was like, "No, everybody was here." And my cousin is a minister, and he came down from up in northern Maine to, help, the family in prayer. While I was out, they were preparing my family and my husband for my passing,
The
and
doctors were.
the doctors were, yes, because
So
I
they
was
did not have a very good prognosis for your family.
no, they didn't. When you're in under this propofol, you get these repeated dreams. Like, you'll have a dream and it will repeat, and then it will repeat, and then it will repeat, and it will repeat till it's, like, driving you crazy that this is the same scenario over and over
How
and over.
fascinating that you can even remember that. But your memory goes even further than a recurring dream. So what happened next there?
Well, it was a dream state was what I was in. I had no idea what was going on with my body at all. I was just in this dream state. And at one point, it changed, and it became a dream where I was walking through, like, a cavern, and I ended up in this alabaster hall, and I was standing there, and a voice said to me, and it was not my voice. You know how you have that voice in your head that
Yeah,
y
the familiar
but
one.
it's your voice.
Yes.
It's actually your voice that's saying that. This was not my voice, and it said, "Pray to the almighty healer." And I did, and I ended up going out of the hall. It was a large hall, and I ended up going down this corridor with little alcoves in this corridor, and in one alcove, there was a well, And on the side of the well was a samurai with a sword, and he was kind of kneeling near this well. And I knew that I didn't want to go there. And I kept going, and I ended up going into this tent where there was purple cloth. And I sat down and I wrapped myself in this purple cloth, and I wrapped like a turban almost around my head with the purple cloth. And I found a small piece of alabaster, and I knew that I had to carve this little piece of alabaster into a white tiger, and in the forehead of the tiger to take a piece of turquoise and put that in the forehead of the tiger and bring it to a lotus fountain and place it on the fountain. I took that to really be a very spiritual dream when I was basically on the edge to go, and it was the decision that I would have to make. That some people, they say, "Oh, they saw the light and they crossed over," that kind of thing, but I feel like, well, maybe I was in the waiting room filling out the forms.
So when you said things changed from this dream state, what you're describing certainly sounds very dream-like, but the way you're speaking now, it sounds like you're considering that this was not a dream any longer, that once you entered this alabaster hallway, that you were actually having a near-death experience. Is that your understanding of what was happening then?
That would be my takeaway, because the dreams before that were very much the same. It was like my everyday sort of life. We went
A
to
regular dream.
yes, like we went to Tim Hortons and we're getting coffee, and then we're going to Cabela's, and then boom, back again, getting coffee at Tim Hortons and going to Cabela's, and so it was like
Nothing as exotic as your alabaster hallway.
nothing.
So when you said that you knew that you had to carve this tiger and bring it to a fountain, which sounds like an offering or a sacrifice of some kind, you were not hearing this voice instructing you. This was just a task that you understood needed to happen. And what purpose did you assign to that? What did the tiger represent, and the turquoise, and what was the result of bringing it to this fountain? What was supposed to happen there?
Well, since then, I've been on a greater spiritual journey. And at the time, I didn't realize the significance of the symbology of it. Whereas the white tiger, I feel, is my spirit animal, the guide that I have in the natural world, and the turquoise eye that I had to place. I hadn't really learned about the chakra system in your body and how it's symbolized by a blue sort of energy, and it's part of the third eye is what they call it, which is intuitive. And
wrapping yourself with the purple fabric, did that have a significance?
purple is a very healing color. People say that amethyst and purple are healing energies, that has a healing aspect. So I felt that. And then the lotus fountain, I feel very drawn to the Chinese goddess and Buddhist goddess, Japanese goddess Kuan Yin, who is the goddess of compassion, and the Buddhist aspect of my philosophy and my spirituality.
Is the lotus flower directly connected to Kuan Yin, or is that just an overall Eastern symbol?
It's a symbology that has to do with Kuan Yin. She's usually always on standing on a lotus flower.
And these are all things you did not know at the
You,
moment that you were having this experience.
correct.
What did you think was the significance of placing the white tiger on the fountain?
An offering. I wouldn't say a sacrifice, but I would say an offering to being more open to knowledge, the next realm of, what spirituality entails.
So you said it was at this point that you knew that there was a decision to be made. Your decision some higher being's decision? What was happening in that moment, as far as you understood it at the time?
I think maybe it was my decision to, to work through 3D realm, this earth that we're on, and to not continue to take a path and not come back.
And so you felt that you had the choice. You were not being told go back or come with us, that it was you. Did you sense another
And
presence at that time that was trying to instruct or guide when you were at that fountain?
maybe Kuan Yin. I like to think that it was Kuan Yin and her loving presence that, no matter what, I would be supported and loved. And so carry on.
But it was up to you whether to continue or to return.
I don't feel that it was so definitive in my mind the way that when I first entered this alabaster chamber and I heard that voice that said, "Pray to the Almighty Healer," but that there were other presences there, and afterwards, when it shifted, it was back to the propofol, rinse and repeat over and over again.
Oh no, you went back to the antechamber. So
Yeah.
then when you regained consciousness, were those memories right there? Or did it take some time for you to realize what your experience had been?
No, they were there. They were
How
right there.
quickly were you telling your husband and family about that?
Once I recovered enough I told them about that. I mean, I told my husband about it pretty much right away. It took a long time to heal. It really did. It took a
How long
long
were you in the hospital after you regained consciousness?
all total, I was in the hospital for 2 months, and I had to learn to walk again. I had to learn to feed myself. I couldn't move. Being in that, coma-induced state, it takes away, like, all of your the muscle, basically, that you
Oh, wow.
have to
So that
uh,
was not a result of the sepsis or the lymphatic surgeries. That was a result of the coma.
I think so. I think so. The nurses had said, this kind of thing, you end up weak and you have to, build it back up, and
Hmm.
boy, they pushed me in a lot of days. It was pretty torturous, but you
Yeah.
you put one foot in front of the other.
But then in the evenings after your work is done for the day and you're laying in your hospital bed, were you reflecting on this experience and trying to make some sense of it during that time? What was happening in your mind and in your heart about what you'd experienced?
At that point, I was still just so sick, and it was just such a struggle that I couldn't reflect on it, basically until I had really gotten home and was able to actually start to have more of a home routine. But in the hospital, and I was lucky to because they put me in a private room and gave my husband a cot, and so he was able to stay with me 24/7. And,
What a
they told me,
blessing.
"Oh, it'll be probably, several months before you feel better," and I was like, "I'll be good next week." Which, I was able to start walking again, just within a few months. I was good to go as far as that goes, but my confidence had been shaken, and I never really felt right until probably about a year. That,
Wow.
I was tired, but, just I don't know, something, kinda gets taken away from your confidence in your life. Or
Sure.
so, the the greatest part was being able to use my hands again, and I went through the occupational therapy, and they had me to practice drawing, and which was pretty frustrating, but if I'm gonna do something, I'm bound and determined, and I'll find a way, and so that was one thing that
Oh
my
gosh, the idea of you not being able to use your hand any longer, I don't even want to think about that. The world would be a dimmer place without your art in it, my dear. How
Thank
long
you.
was it before you actually engaged in creating a piece of art?
I slowly started tattooing because we owned our tattoo shop at the same time. So I slowly started that probably about 4 or 5 months later after I got out of the hospital.
So that
And
was your re-entry into creative world was through tattoo.
yes, because I would spend maybe an hour or something like that. I limited my clients at that point and only did very small things because I would get tired so easily.
So let me
And
back you up a moment here, just for the audience sake, to say that there was a point in time when you decided that you could take the skill set and the talent that you had, and as you've experimented with other mediums in the past, you made the choice to learn how to transfer those abilities to tattoo because your son was a tattoo artist. Is that correct? And you actually relocated in order to be near him and to go into business with him, if I remember correctly.
Uh, well, we didn't go into business together, but I did relocate, and we worked together
Mm-hmm,
in a studio at the same time. He did teach me how to tattoo.
mm-hmm.
What I ended up doing when I came out of recovery was after reflecting upon what happened in that dream state, I wanted to work it out, which is how I process the world through my art. And I wanted to create a painting that would reflect that. And I actually ended up creating two paintings that symbolized the white tiger and the turquoise third eye. One was just a small painting that I kind of went back and did after the initial one, which shows the sort of scenario with a woman holding the alabaster tiger next to the lotus fountain. And I think that will be on your blog,
Those are
probably.
the two images you sent me to include on the blog.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you'd like to see those two absolutely stunning paintings, you can go ahead and check the show notes for the link to the blog entry, and you'll be able to see these paintings for yourself. So those were not tattoo, those were paintings. And was that right around the same time that you were returning to tattooing, that you were conceiving of these paintings and working on them at the same time, or did that come
Yeah.
later?
Yes.
And those are in your personal collection, I would imagine, or were those offered up for sale? That's a pretty intimate little series there.
No, they're in my personal collection
Mhm.
along with the other paintings that I had done because another traumatic experience in my life was my son's passing, and I did a few paintings around that trauma that,
And that was not very long after you found your way back to health. So you'd been in the hospital for a couple of months and then recovering for up to another year at home,
mhm,
and getting back into tattoo and getting back into painting and creating these paintings that reflected your coma. We can call it your NDE
right.
experience. And then, it looks like you're getting your feet back under you and finding your path in the world again. And then you're bumping up against another trauma in the loss of your son. So what happened there, Pat?
My son was also very creative. He was very sensitive. He was a visual artist. He was a musician. He could write, but unfortunately, he succumbed to drugs, and that was something that I mean, you're never prepared. If someone is a drug addict, that that there's a possibility of losing them, and that they may not recover from it. No matter how hard we tried. He was an adult. He was 42,
Mm-hmm.
and you just you want to prepare yourself for something like that, but you're never really prepared.
Of course not. And honestly, my husband has lost two children, and I was a grief counselor for 3 years, and I can tell you there's nothing that I've seen that's more difficult to navigate than a parent having to wrap their head and their heart around the loss of a child. It's so counter to everything that feels orderly in this world. It's way out of order and so painful, especially for a mother, the person that carried this person inside their body and gave them to the world. So I'm
Yeah.
sure that must have been just an awful thing to have to go through, and so soon. It was just about at the 1 year mark, wasn't it? When that
Um,
happened.
yes, yes.
Were you working together at the time?
No, I hadn't seen him for he ended up, going to Florida, and he never wanted me to have contact with him, only he would want to have contact with me. And so it was very difficult. A lot of times I didn't know where he was. And, at one point, he was trying to get clean, and we were able to go to Florida and to see him and spend a week there and be with him. And, I knew when we parted that that was the last time I was ever gonna see him. It was something that I knew in my heart was
And
going.
how long after that did you lose him?
I think it was 2 years, probably 2
Hmm.
years,
So he
something.
struggled for a long time, it sounds
He
like.
struggled for a very long time,
Hmm.
and,
Yeah.
so that the I mean, the only way that I could come to terms with it was to really understand that, we have our own life path, and that, as much, that I loved him, I have my path, and, you have to love yourself too, and you can't it's a double tragedy if you both succumb to all of
Yeah.
that.
But that's so hard to see when you're watching it happen at the moment. Every instinct in your body is to rescue and to save, or to, even put yourself in harm's way on their behalf. So, I mean, I've witnessed that in my own life, and I understand how difficult that must have been. You
Mm,
said that you created a series of paintings around this as well, and I've seen those paintings. And those are paintings where that feature the lanterns that show up in your work.
mhm.
So can you talk about that symbology and that imagery, the way that you reflect light? Now, those paintings would be available another way. They won't be on the blog, but the way that you have used that symbol in so many paintings, can you talk about that?
Yes, they've actually sort of developed over a period of time. The first painting that I did, to sort of process through the grief and release the grief was an angel with a dove, a white dove. And then, the second painting that I did to help release the grief was a woman in a field of bleeding hearts with, she has sort of a bird cage midsection, and she's opening up the bird cage, and these, swallows are flying out. And, she has in her hand a shovel and, like a heart, like a realistic heart on the shovel. So from there, I ended up doing a painting that has a lot of women, sort of angelic looking women in sort of flowing robes, and they're holding lanterns, and they're kind of flying in this vortex that's going up
And
towards.
these are like Chinese paper lanterns. They're
Yeah,
not like
yeah,
Dickens lanterns that are made of
right,
glass and metal. They're just beautiful paper lanterns that have this lovely amber orange glow that reflects on the other characters that are in the painting.
right.
What does that represent for you?
Well, the title of the painting is Lanterns to Heaven, and it just is to me, I would want a way lighted, like here's light for your path
Hmm.
to heaven.
Yeah. And they're beautiful paintings, and they were not done for professional reasons. They were your own expression, how you processed these traumas together. So I'm actually wondering if you consider the NDE to be a trauma. Did it feel like something that needed to be recovered from? I'm not talking about your illness. I'm talking about that experience that you had while you were in the coma. How did that sit with you during your recovery and as you moved forward in life? Was it a welcome, embraced thing? Was it unsettling in any way? Did it feel unresolved? Did it feel like it provided some kind of certainty for you? It certainly seems to have sent you on your journey to find out more about the symbology. But how did that live inside of you when you started recovering?
It was a little unsettling. Parts of it were a little unsettling, but all in all, I think that it helped me to continue on my spiritual journey. I feel like I had started that before when I was in the martial arts years ago, really had set me on more of a spiritual journey, and it's just, continued to grow as time has gone by. So, but I would consider those 2 events to be pretty traumatic events in my
Mm-hmm,
life that
certainly.
I needed to process, and I think that, most people that are creative find their creativity as a way to process the world and what they're going through in
Certainly.
the world, because we all have some sort of trauma, some sort of things that we need to process that, we want to come out the other side as being healthy and whole individuals. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there has to be some kind of process.
mhm,
How long has it been since you went through those experiences?
about 10 years ago,
And where do you feel you are now on your path? Are you feeling good about where this journey has taken you and where you're headed?
I feel good about it. The grief journey with my son, that lasted a while. He had a lot of depression for maybe about 4 months, 4 or 5 months, something like that. But it just, really having to embrace, reality, embrace myself, that, there wasn't anything that I could do because as a parent, it doesn't matter what happens, you go to that blame thing like,
Sure, you've spent so many years being responsible for the well-being of this child. It's so
right,
hard as a mother to
right,
transition and say it's
right,
not really my responsibility anymore. It always feels like your responsibility. I
right,
am over 60, let's just say, and my mother still insists that she's entitled to mother me whenever she feels like it because I am still her baby. So I can understand that.
that's right, my mother used to say that too.
Yeah, it just doesn't ever end. I'm curious to know, have you noticed changes in what your art looks like or in the process of making art as a result of going through these experiences?
I would say that my personal art, there has been changes to it, that there's a spiritual side of it, because I think that to go through any sort of trauma like that, I mean, I would hope that most people would embrace a spiritual aspect of whatever they were going through as a way to grow in their journey through
Sure.
life.
So the symbology that you discovered that you said you didn't know much about at the time is all heavily reminiscent of Eastern philosophies, and you've mentioned you know being interested in Buddhism, and I know that you study Shaolin Kenpo and Tai Chi in the martial arts side. So your spiritual journey since seems to have taken very much an Eastern track. Had that already begun before you became sick, or did this happen after your recovery?
No, it had already begun. Actually, it begun right, like around the time I was leaving Long Island.
When I
I th
met you, when we were both living on Long Island at the time, you were Christian.
Yes, I
I'm
was.
very passionate about that because you
I
were
was.
actually the first person in my life to tell me I needed some Jesus. When did the shift toward the Eastern spirituality happen for you? You said it was right around the time you were moving out of New York.
Mhm. The Eastern philosophy is more of like a life path kind of a thing, whereas religion, I came to discover, is, I mean, it helps you on your life path for sure. But I feel that there are many paths to God. I've really discovered that there are many paths for my own personal journey, that, I feel that Jesus is an ascended master, and yes, we do need more Jesus, and we need more Kuan Yin, and we need, more Buddha, and we need more of the spiritual leaders in the world to help us to live happier, more purposeful, and, a better life.
And so I imagine in tandem with that journey, I just happen to know because of personal conversations that we've had, you've become very interested in just the very nature of who and what we are, going all the way back to the beginning of this conversation when you wanted to know what made a horse a horse. I think that you feel that way about the universe just in conversations that you and I have. And so your openness to all things that can be discerned, some
Mhm.
things that are very intangible, some things that maybe we don't claim to have all the answers about, but I know that you're interested in vibrations. And I was talking about that with another guest earlier, that math and music and vibration has a lot to do with pretty much everything,
Mhm.
and trying to figure out how all of that connects us, and how all of that connects us to the cosmos is just a fascinating topic. And for me, that goes beyond spirituality. That is just figuring out. I've said this in the past. What I'm trying to do is just figure out the universe and my place in it, knowing that I will never have those answers while I'm in this vessel. I really have a very strong feeling that there will come a day when I'm
Mhm.
no longer in this vessel, that I will open my eyes somewhere else and say, so that's what that was all about. And I've kind of let go of the idea that I will have those answers. And in the embracing of the uncertainty, there is peace for me. But I'm still curious. One of the things I joke about what I'm doing with this podcast is that I'm looking under rocks and poking stuff with sticks. It's
Mhm.
just the natural curiosity that we have, especially creatives. And I guess those of us who've been interested in science fiction and fantasy literature in our lives, we're kind of primed to be open minded about just exploring possibilities, to go where no man has gone before, one might say. I'm
Yeah.
just wondering if you have any thoughts about that rambling that I just did.
I think that's perfect, that, being open to possibilities, the creative aspect, because when you're creative, you're open to new ideas, to new experiences. I like that.
Your inner life as well as
Mhm.
your trajectory. Yeah.
Right. Inner and outer life, yes.
I want to I want to wrap up the conversation by asking you about your current work. I know that you've recently discovered a whole new world of creative expression that I only barely understand, and that is the world of NFTs. So, could you please share with me and my listeners a little bit about what NFTs are and what you're doing in that space?
What I'm doing in that space is, part of a game called Versus, and people can go on Discord if they are interested to check that out. One of the things about Versus is this game that they're developing, people are able to create their own story, and they're able to sort of direct how things go. One of the things is that it's a computer game, and they're using NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens, I
There
guess
you
is
are.
is what it's called. It's a blockchain technology so that it's limited as far as what it is. So with this game, they're using my images as part of these tokens, and you can, buy these tokens the way that somebody in Magic the Gathering would buy these trading cards, and then they would play this game with it and sort of almost, a cross between Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons and, other different games that are played. And it's a very family-friendly game, which I'm really happy to be a part of that. So in essence, I'm not creating a whole lot for that, but it's kind of an exciting new adventure that I have going with my art.
Well, Pat, I want to thank you so much for being a part of this podcast, for being a supporter and a cheerleader from the very beginning, and for being a part of this particular episode and sharing your story with me and with the audience. I typically end every episode with a parting thought. Because we've been such dear friends for so long, I would like to offer you the honor of sharing your parting thought with our audience today. Just a little something to leave people with on the way out of podcast land. So, what would you like to share for the parting thought today?
Oh, thank you so much. My son was a big Tom Waits fan, and I would just like to leave with this. The earth is not my home. I'm just passing by. I'm not sure what song that was from, but it's a Tom Waits quote.
With my heartfelt thanks to Pat, as well as all of the other guests that have joined me for this series, I'm going to conclude it, and I'm going to bid you a very brief farewell and a very, very happy holiday season. We're going to take a short break. I'm going to be back on January 4 with the first in my series on personal paranormal encounters. So for now, go do your thing. Go shop, go celebrate, go decorate, go do the things that you do, or stay quiet and composed. It's probably going to be kind of quiet for me this year. Whatever it is that fills your heart, focus on it and do it. And today I'm going to leave you with a parting thought, which is a poem by a lovely woman named Liz Newman. She has written a book full of her poetry, and a lot of it has to do with her grief journey. And you probably picked up a couple of tidbits here and there along this series that grief is a big part of my personal story, and it resonates in me all the time. So this poem spoke to me in a big way. I carry grief with me. It won't always look how I think it should be, but it's constant and steady, and when it knocks, I'll try to be ready. It won't always come through tears. It won't always look the same through the years. But in one way or another, I carry grief with me. I carry love with me. It won't always look how I think it should be, but it's constant and steady, and when it knocks, I'll try to be ready. It's a song my heart sings and the world hears. It's a story my soul carries despite all its fears. But in one way or another, I carry love with me. Oh, to carry them both is my heart's hardest journey, but I don't walk alone, and I know you'll be with me. So until we meet again, I'll carry the grief, I'll carry the love, I'll carry them with me. Oh, I'll carry you with me. I want to thank you for joining me for this series, my very first effort into the world of podcasting. And until 2023 brings us a brand new season, I want to say thanks for listening. Come on back, and I will see you next year. Cool Gray in Studio A is a fine-tuned services production. It exists for entertainment purposes and is not intended to be used as a sole source of information or advice on any subject. Find and follow this podcast at coolgraystudios.com.